The movie opens up in a school environment in Gifu, Japan. A teenage boy professing his love to Mayumi Sawada gets turned down by her. Although Mayumi praises him for his courage and promises to pretend as if nothing ever happened. In the next scene, during track practice, one of Mayumi's best friends Kaoru reveals that Mayumi has a crush on the captain of the track team called Seiji. Kaoru however bursts Mayumi's bubble when she tells her Seiji would be leaving high school for Tokyo to start college. Meanwhile, Mayumi's dad, Mr. Sawada, is visited by a man named Suzuki in his poultry farm with a proposal to invest in his poultry business. But actually, he has an ulterior motive. Suzuki is Sachiko's ex-boyfriend, one of Mayumi's elder sisters. So he asks Mr. Sawada if Sachiko is truly getting married to another person and hands him a letter to be given to her. On the school bus back home, Mayumi is troubled by a long list given to her by Kaoru. The list contains the names of all the other girls who also have feelings for Seiji. Although Seiji is also on the bus, Mayumi doesn't yet know how to approach him, especially because he is older. Soon, she summons up her courage and approaches him very awkwardly. She even gets to sit with him but still doesn't have the guts to say something. When the bus gets to Mayumi's stop, she attempts to tell Seiji about her feelings but eventually can't and instead just bids him farewell. Later that evening, Mayumi is spending the evening with her other sister Yukie, who is a hairstylist by profession. When she asks Mayumi what the person she has feelings for is like, Mayumi tells her he's dependable, smart, and cool. That same evening, while the Sawada family is preparing for Sachiko's wedding, Suzuki puts a phone call through to Sachiko in an attempt to reveal something to her in person. She however refuses to listen and hangs up, leaving Suzuki totally depressed. In the morning, since Mayumi is going to be the only one left in the house with their parents after the wedding, she asks to keep Sachiko's room to herself and Sachiko agrees. Later during the wedding ceremony, Sachiko catches Suzuki spying on her before he later disappears, leaving her bothered. However, she doesn't disclose the truth to her husband, Kenji, when he asks. Soon, Mayumi and Mrs. Sawada see Yukie off as she goes back to her home. Yukie tells Mayumi before she departs to tell Seiji how she feels. That evening, Mayumi sews a pair of fingerless gloves which she presents to Seiji on graduation day. After receiving the present, Seiji takes Mayumi to see a beautiful view with him and also gives her a button from his uniform as a token of his affection. Mayumi goes to bed that night filled with joy, but this is cut short when Suzuki shows up and sprinkles acid on her face, mistaking Mayumi for Sachiko. Mrs. Sawada hears her scream and rushes immediately to see what happened. Unfortunately, she runs into Suzuki, who asks her where Sachiko is and gives her a deep cut across the face without even waiting for an answer. Mr. Sawada arrives with a gun which he fires off target to scare the assailant away before then realizing that it is Suzuki, his investor. However, grieved as he is, Suzuki ends up terminating Mrs. Sawada and Mr. Sawada in turn blows his brains out. Mayumi is then rushed to a hospital where she undergoes surgery. Unfortunately though, the surgery doesn't come with much success and Mayumi's face will forever be deformed. After hearing the news, Mayumi's friends Junko and Kaoru pay her a visit at her house but are not allowed to see her while Mayumi peeps at them through the window. Soon, after her long stay at home, Mayumi decides to go back to school. She's glad to find out that she is going to be in the same class as her best friends this year. However, Mayumi's return to school turns out for the worse as she is being mocked by her colleagues. They refer to Mayumi as the mutant girl and think she will never have a husband. She could care less about this until a student calls her father a murderer. This forces Mayumi to grab and beat her mercilessly, leading to her detention. Mayumi later finds a letter from Seiji and at the same time sees a blurred figure of a woman in red who later disappears right before her eyes. After reading the letter, she writes back to Seiji. That night, since Mr. Sawada is in terrible debt as a result of Suzuki's death, he has only one option left. He drives off and eliminates himself so as to pay off his debts with his life insurance. Then, Sachiko begins to express regret for having broken up with Suzuki, since that has been the cause of the loss of both their parents and Mayumi's joy. Next, she plans to take up a job at a supermarket to support her sisters and stay with them. Yukie also promises to move back in and report to her workplace from home as well. Well, to make matters worse for Mayumi, her best friends Junko and Kaoru have begun to stay away from her. Plus, they even speak badly about her to others, and when asked if they were best friends, they deny it. Mayumi gets to know about this and feels very bad. Later that evening, Mayumi sees the strange figure of the woman in red once again and becomes frightened. So she calls Yukie to come home immediately, telling her she's scared. Next, she goes to lock the door and at the same time sights the strange figure right on the other side of the door coming towards her. As she flees to hide, the figure seems to draw nearer, and then she screams out of fear. Then, it turns out to be Sachiko as she switches on the lights. The next morning, Junko and Kaoru are reported in the news to have been murdered with a pair of scissors by a woman wearing a red coat. At their funeral service, Mayumi sobs bitterly concerning their deaths. Seiji also attends the funeral and Mayumi goes to speak with him, asking to go with him to see the beautiful view the next morning. So, once he has accepted, Mayumi goes to Yukie's salon to have her hair done while telling Yukie she'd be going out with Seiji the next morning. Then the next morning as they see the view, Seiji tells her they aren't seeing each other because he only thought of her as a little sister. He also adds that the button he gave her was only advised by Junko. But Mayumi discloses that she never thought of him as a brother. Then she asks if he is shying away from her because of her face and he says she still looks pretty. Hearing this, Mayumi removes her mask and asks him once again if she still looks pretty. Seiji shrinks at the sight of the scar and only rather tells Mayumi he is already seeing someone. Then as they go back together, Mayumi stops short on the way watching in anger as Seiji walks without looking back. The scene then changes to Mayumi washing blood off a pair of scissors. Then a flashback reveals someone in red rushing at Seiji and stabbing him multiple times with a pair of scissors. Soon, the personality behind the woman in red is revealed to be Mayumi. Then again, we get another flashback to how she killed Junko and Kaoru, while she stands holding the scissors with blood dripping from them. In the next scene, Yukie's boss informs her about a new salon asking if she'd like to run it. Then at the same time, the news of Seiji being missing is reported on TV. During dinner, Yukie discusses the new shop with Sachiko stating that its location is near their house, which is a dream come true for her. Later when a detective comes over to the house to interrogate Mayumi regarding Seiji's case, Yukie realizes that the missing person is the same person she told her she was meeting. Then, she gets very suspicious of Mayumi and thinks she knows something. But when she asks Mayumi, she denies it, saying they never saw each other as promised. However, Yukie doesn't believe this and runs to discuss the same with Sachiko, who doesn't believe that Mayumi could be lying. On this note, Yukie seeks permission from her boss to leave work early the next day when she's certain Mayumi would be in school. She gets home and goes straight to Mayumi's room to look for solid evidence. There, she finds one of Mayumi's school uniforms stained with blood and she goes to show this to Sachiko, telling her she believes Mayumi is somehow involved in those incidents. But Sachiko doesn't let her go to the police, insisting that it would drag their family name in the mud and hence cause them to be unable to live anywhere while also affecting Yukie's career. Sachiko therefore asks Yukie to give her time to figure out what to do. Later that day, when Mayumi arrives from school, she soon realizes that one of her sisters has been to her room and perhaps now knows the truth. So, during dinner, she keeps her scissors with her so she can end both of her sisters. Unfortunately, Sachiko has poisoned Mayumi's juice unknown to Yukie and her. Soon, Mayumi begins to spit blood while Sachiko expresses that eliminating Mayumi is the only way to erase the evil in her. After Mayumi dies, Sachiko attempts to see whether she's still breathing but Mayumi wakes back up and injures her with the scissors in her hand. Then, with Yukie reluctant about the whole thing, they both take her body to be buried. Eventually, Yukie becomes fidgety at work and can hardly concentrate. Meanwhile, Mayumi has awakened from the dead and visits Yukie's salon, first eliminating her boss before confronting Yukie. She first cuts off her fingers, and then eliminates Yukie while the customers watch in amazement. Sachiko is listening to solo opera music when Mayumi appears, first stabbing her on the shoulder. Sachiko survives this and flees, holding her wound, and heads down the stairs where she picks up a knife and successfully stabs Mayumi, who then falls to the floor. Sachiko runs out of the house while Mayumi gets back up and begins to chase her. After running for a while, Sachiko stops when she sees a lot of people in front of her, feeling relieved. Out of the blue, Mayumi appears yet again and stabs her several times before giving up. She asks Sachiko if she is pretty before she passes away without a response.